I realize that fans and media typically are very, very much in love with the idea of firing coaches and general managers whenever things don't go exactly as they were anticipated. It's always easy to scapegoat and it's always easy to demand and call and ask for change. I get all of that. And there was no question in my mind that as the 2014 Chicago Bears season progressed and the season became exactly what the hell I thought it was going to be, yet so many foolishly did not agree that it was going to be, that major changes were in place coming up this offseason. I knew because so many people thought this team was going to be so much better than it actually really was and ultimately was going to be, that Trestman was probably going to be gone and general manager Phil Emery right along with him. And I'm not always the biggest fan of just firing people for firing's sake because I don't always feel that's the most productive. You have to have continuity as an organization. However, sometimes you do get to a point in time where there's just no choice. You have to go in a different direction. A change must be made. And there is no doubt that after the 2014 Chicago Bears season, you could clearly see that there was no hope of things getting any better, that things were only going to get worse from here under the current regime. Big changes had to be made. And Trestman needed to go, and Phil Emery needed to go. Frankly, more people needed to go, but that's what we got. I'm not that surprised. And I was pleased with that decision because it had to happen. So I was hoping that an organization that for so long has accepted and perpetuated a cycle of mediocrity within Halas Hall would sit there now and understand the error of their previous ways and not just make change for change's sake, because I think not only is that not productive, it can in fact be very counterproductive, but decide to make the proper, necessary, correct changes from an organizational structure standpoint and understand that a change in philosophy was needed as well, because this is not a good team. And this is not a good team anytime soon. This is a team that has drafted poorly for years. This is a team without a lot of building blocks for the future. This is a team that really doesn't have a presence. The whole organization needed to be rebuilt from the top down, bottom up. They needed a full and complete Chicago Cubs style rebuild. No question in my mind. I've been calling for it for over 2 years now. And now I think everybody could clearly see just how bad things are in Chicago. It's not even just mediocre anymore. It's just flat out bad. So I was hoping that the Chicago Bears organization was going to understand this and that the Chicago Bears organization was going to conduct themselves in a different manner and go about doing business in a different way than they have done in the past. And the first real key thing that I was going to watch to see if there was anything different or if all things were just the same with the Chicago Bears again was this general manager search. And I know that general managers don't fall off of trees. And you can't always sit there and just get somebody else's successful GM to come on over. It just doesn't necessarily work out like that. I understand that. And I also understand that a lot of people believe that because they brought in Ernie Accorsi as a consultant during the interview and hiring process for a general manager, that this is a sign that things are incredibly different amongst the Chicago Bears organization, and that magically all of a sudden things are instantly going to get better because change is afoot and change is in the air and big changes have been made because Ernie Accorsi was there and skip and whoop-de-whoop. But I personally don't buy that bullshit. Personally, the way I look at this Chicago Bears general manager search and ultimately who they decided to hire, I look at it frankly as a lot more of the same. And first and foremost, the reason I say that is because when you look at the people involved with the decision-making process, that's George McCaskey and team president Ted Phillips, I say, wait a second. Aren't these the same clowns that decided on Phil Emery? Aren't these the same clowns that after the headhunter search brought up the name Jerry Angelo, they decided to hire him? So these same guys whose decision-making and poor decision-making at that has helped create a cycle of mediocrity in this organization for well over a decade now are making the decision again? We're putting them in charge of making football decisions, and when they've made football decisions in the past, they haven't been good football decisions. We're all of a sudden now expecting that these guys are going to get a clue and that these guys are going to get it right? No, I'm sorry. It just doesn't work out like that. Instead of the Chicago Bears fully engaging in a Chicago Cubs type of rebuild, where they understood that they needed to bring in a team president first, a real football guy, to set everything else in place underneath him from a football operations standpoint, the Chicago Bears organization have left the same clowns of McCaskey and Phillips in charge, who have made the previously ridiculous decisions to hire Jerry Angelo and most notably Phil Emery. These guys have hired multiple failed general managers. Why are we giving them another opportunity to hire yet another failed general manager? And then even when you look at the candidates that the Bears had interest in and who the Bears ultimately interviewed, you're talking about Chris Ballard from the Kansas City Chiefs, a guy who spent 12 years in the Chicago Bears organization as a scout. This was a guy that many felt was going to be the GM in waiting, that he was going to be the hands-down favorite to become the next general manager of the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears, in the simple fact that they even would want to even interview a guy that has been a part of this failed regime over the past 12 years, from 2001 to 2012. The guy that has been a part of many terrible, horrible drafts. The fact that he was even a contender and a leading contender at that shows you just how ridiculous this whole Bears general manager search process really has been. Then you've got Ryan Pace from the New Orleans Saints, the youngest of the candidates, I believe at age 37, and a guy that's been with the Saints organization over the past decade, an organization that's had some success, won a Super Bowl, but also you're talking about a guy from the personnel side who really hasn't had a lot of influence and say-so when it comes to scouting, and on top of that, coming from a Saints organization who themselves just finished 7-9 in 2014, whose organizational needle is pointing in a downward trajectory, in part because of the failures of that organization in the draft in recent years. And then I see names like Lake Dawson of the Tennessee Titans. The Titans who finished 2-14 in 2014 that have drafted terribly? That Lake Dawson? We're going to bring him in for an interview? Brian Gain from the Texans? Somebody involved with an organization that decided they had to wait until the fourth round to draft a quarterback in 2014 when it was obviously such a pressing need. And then when they did draft one, they drafted a 25-year-old named Tom Savage from Pittsburgh, all the while completely passing on the notion of being able to draft a Teddy Bridgewater or a Derek Carr because they just had to have Jadeveon Clowney at number 1 overall. These were the candidates. These were the guys that we were going to interview. The Chiefs didn't make the playoffs. The Saints didn't make the playoffs. The Titans didn't make the playoffs. The Texans didn't make the playoffs. Out of those 4 candidates, only 2 of them would have been coming from an organization that had a winning record in 2014. And then when you look at Ballard, here is a guy just like Emery, once worked for the organization, went to the Chiefs. Now you're going to bring him back in, and oh my God, it's the same shit. It's all the same. It's the same type of people with the same type of credentials, the same type of questionable credentials that could come on the cheap that the Bears pursue. This is the same shit, people, all over again. Don't be fucking stupid about this. This is Jerry Angelo. This is Mark Hatley. This is Phil Emery all over again. The Bears go a little bit off the beaten path on the reservation in order to get the cheaper option because while the Bears spend money on their players, where they don't spend money is on their coaches, their scouting department, and the general manager. That's where they go on the cheap, and that's the biggest mistake that they make because it's all those years of going on the cheap that have worked out so well for this organization, right? So ultimately, the guys who have hired previously failed general managers like Jerry Angelo and Phil Emery were once again given the opportunity to hire perhaps another future failed general manager, and they decided to go the younger route and go with Ryan Pace of the New Orleans Saints. At age 37, he becomes the youngest general manager in the National Football League, and I suppose a lot of Bear fans are going to sit there and tell me, well, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, and you have to wait to see how this plays out. No, fuck you. What has this organization done to deserve the benefit of the doubt? What has this organization done that sits there and makes you think in any way, shape, or form that George McCaskey and Ted Phillips are competent in what they do and frankly know at all what the hell they're doing? I'm supposed to give them the benefit of the doubt. These same asshats who signed off on giving Cutler the biggest contract in the NFL last offseason, I'm now supposed to entrust the future of the organization to when they botched it so badly, in particular with Phil fucking Emery. The same idiotic decision makers that screwed up this organization now are being put into position to try and fix things. All the while going about hiring the same type of guy that they did before. And that's a fact. So no, I'm not going to give this organization the benefit of the doubt because they haven't fucking earned it and they don't freaking deserve it. And when you look even at the candidates that they brought in to interview and potentially even consider hiring, you're bringing in somebody from the Titans. Oh, he's well respected. His fucking team went 2-14. That's the type of guy that you think is a must interview? A guy from the Saints in Ryan Pace, who has drafted poorly in recent years, that organization, they're in a terrible position in terms of the salary cap. They've got an aging quarterback, a once elite quarterback who's kind of still elite in Drew Brees, that is drafted very poorly in recent years. They finished 7-9 for a reason. Things could get even worse going forward for the Saints. This is the guy that you want. I will grant you, at least it's not Chris Ballard. At least it's not the guy that, because of familiarity of being in Halas Hall for 12 years, got the job. Because that literally would have been Phil Emery all fucking over again. And I understand they see this and they see the young prodigy guy and they get all fascinated and they just think it's outstanding. But I look at the end of the day and I'm like, they didn't interview one person from a real contending organization. They didn't interview one person involved with the Seattle Seahawks. Not one person from, let's say, the Green Bay Packers, a team that is clearly the gold standard in your division. And for you to ever do anything in that division again, you're going to have to be better than a team that has built primarily through the draft, that in a lot of ways is a model of what you should be patterning yourself after as an organization. They didn't bring anybody in to interview. Not Wolf's kid. Not any other executives with the Packers. Not Ted Thompson's right-hand man, Alonzo Highsmith, a guy who would seem perfectly qualified in this case. If you're going to go with a head of scouting or a pro personnel director or a personnel director, at least go with one that comes from an organization that has somewhat drafted well in recent years and has built and put together a consistent winner that, as we speak, is possibly contending to win Super Bowl 49. And has won a Super Bowl in recent history. Not one person from the Green Bay Packers was brought in to interview. Not one person from the Baltimore Ravens was brought in to interview. Not one damn person was brought in from the Denver Broncos. Not one damn person was brought in from the New England Patriots. Not a fucking one. Instead, we bring in somebody from the Chiefs. A Chiefs organization that had a huge need at wide receiver in this draft, in a class that was loaded with wide receiver talent. They took Dee Ford in the first round, a bit of a reach, when the next year's class, it was well established, was going to be deep and loaded at edge rushers. You've got a Saints team that has drafted poorly in recent years, is in a terrible salary cap situation, and a Titans team that missed terribly on Jake Locker, went 2-14 this year, and a guy in Brian Gaine from the Texans, who was a part of the organization decision-making process, to sit there and draft Jadeveon Clowney over a guy like a Khalil Mack or over a guy like a Teddy Bridgewater, an organization that clearly needed quarterback and decided they could wait on it. And that's the reason that they didn't make the playoffs. And the Texans team that has a scattered history in terms of recent drafting. Yeah, they got J.J. Watt right, but they've gotten other picks wrong too. These are the Fantastic Four. These are the four horsemen that were going to stop the apocalypse. And one of these guys was going to spearhead massive, necessary changes that were going to totally reshape and rebuild this Bears organization. I'm sorry, this is just more of the same old shit to me. Out of the four, I think Ryan Pace was the best candidate, and I do think he's positioned to be the best possible guy to succeed out of the four. I will clearly establish that and completely agree with that. But what the fuck is that really saying? It just looks like to me the Bears went on the cheap here. It looks like to me the Bears didn't want to rock the boat, and they didn't want to change anything. When you've got the same decision makers making the same types of decisions over and over again, it'd be insane to think anything is ultimately going to turn out any differently. So for all the optimism, for whatever reason, and all the benefit of the doubt that we're supposed to give the Bears organization that they haven't deserved, I assure you this Bears GM hire is just more of the same old shit.